there's a few hospitals.
For those folks that couldn't be with us, I know there's a handful of folks who are doing all kinds of other things, everything from chasing after kids after a long day of homeschool to being on the 45th of their Zoom call for the day if they're working from home. It's again, we're in a different moment, but we're in it together. So welcome to everyone. It's really wonderful to have so many people joining, and as my background for the last 15 years has been trauma, understanding trauma and trauma care, this felt like an offering that I could put out there as a way to kind of offer a baseline for where we're at, what it feels like, what's normal. And by the way, probably everything you're feeling right now is normal. I think there was a doctor, maybe it was on a CNN interview recently, that said we're waiting for the P in the PTSD, in that we're in a time of trauma. We really are. We're not in a place yet for there to be post-traumatic stress, because very much like being in a war zone, although that language I think is sometimes overused from the political sphere around this moment, very much how we experience a moment of crisis feels like an inner and outer battle, and we're in the midst of it. We're not on the other side of anything yet. And so a rise in intensity of all of our feelings is supernatural. And so I want to be able to talk about some of those things, to be able to normalize some of those things. Like I said, in terms of me and my background, I'm a clinical social worker. I'm also a registered yoga teacher, but generally speaking, my work for the last 15 years in various communities and populations has really been around trauma in various forms, how it impacts different communities, how it shows up, both studying and assessing what that means, and then also providing care and treatment for folks that are experiencing trauma, experiencing post-traumatic response. Some of my work has circled around spiritual and religious trauma. So when people are harmed in the places that should be spiritually nourishing, but end up not being for one reason or another. I spent the last 5 years or so working specifically on social movement trauma. So the sort of sponsoring org for this event tonight is TRACK, which is something I collaboratively started, which is a project that was intended to focus on trauma response and crisis care for social movements. And part of the intentionality of this project was to also be able to support crisis as it shows up, to be the front lines of movements, but also be on the front lines of social change in all the ways it manifests, and be able to provide education and care around that. And I'll get a little more at the end of this into some of the efforts that TRAC is working on in the upcoming weeks, things that you might be interested in or want to get involved in related to what we're trying to do in terms of response and care. But this webinar was meant to sort of be an introduction to some of that support. I spent about 8 years working with combat veterans and survivors of military sexual trauma for the Department of Veterans Affairs. And it was also part of that overlapped with my work with social movement trauma, seeing that there being a real correlation between how people experience the trauma in social movements in their bodies and in their communities that actually looked very similar to war trauma. And I would say this moment overlaps in that same way, in the sense that we're sort of in a crisis zone, you know, that literally the places we inhabit are the crisis zone in this moment. I also have worked with trauma and addiction, and again, spiritual and religious trauma, and social movement trauma more specifically in the last 5 years or so. I have also, just as sort of part of my own exploration of the different ways that trauma impacts people, done a good bit of sort of personal, professional research in large impact crisis type trauma, and also actually pandemic trauma, most specifically looking at the history and lineage of the HIV/AIDS crisis in the United States and how that particular pandemic, while somewhat isolated within particular community, was a pandemic. And while I was watching, what got me sort of engaged in thinking about illness as trauma and illness as collective trauma was years ago, I was watching a film called How to Survive the Plague, which was a documentary that was specifically about the HIV/AIDS crisis, in which they were interviewing, they were showing past footage about of folks during the crisis, and then they were showing live real-time interviews with those same people, the ones that had actually survived. And what I began to notice was that every one of the people that was being interviewed was showing symptoms of trauma and PTSD in the interview. And because of course it's a documentary, it's not there to treat people's trauma. I felt this rise of, all these people are still so much holding the trauma of that moment. And actually being part of this documentary is bringing all of that up, which made me just want to do more exploration on illness as trauma and on collective illness as trauma. So some of that will come into our conversation tonight. But before we do anything else, as somebody who is really engaged with how our bodies are connected to our emotional state, and I would say the fact that we're in a moment of illness trauma, our bodies are deeply connected with our emotional states right now. And our sensitization to our bodies is really alive and vivid in ways that can ground us, but also can spin us out. So I'd like to take a moment in the beginning to breathe together. Again, this current moment and epidemic is very much about breath. It's about lungs. It's about the illness of lungs. And for many of us in our bodies, the fear of what that panic feels like in our own bodies, or the fear of that, what is possible in our own bodies around that. So I'd like to take a few moments together before we get into some more of the content-based stuff to breathe together. So if you just want to get comfortable wherever it is you are sitting in your home space, we're going to do a practice that's a really simple practice that many of you may have engaged in multiple times before or not. It's called 3-part breath. So it's just a simple breathing practice coming out of yoga lineage. And what it really is meant to do is re-regulate our breath and our ability to breathe. There's a statement from Dr. Andrew Weil that I like that talks about breath specifically, and he says breath is the master key. And I really think it is, because if we look at our bodies and how we regulate stress, we hyperventilate, or we hold our breath when we feel really anxious or stressed or panicked. And when we breathe normally, we kind of remind our whole system, from body to mind, to settle just a little, even if it's just for the few moments of breath. So I'd like to open with doing that together. So get comfortable, again, wherever you are. If it's comfortable for you, you can close your eyes, but you don't have to. If you're not closing your eyes, just find something to look at on the ground or in front of you, so as you can focus on that and not be distracted from anything else around. And just get comfortable where you're seated. And before you do anything else, just bring your attention in on your breath. So just notice the rhythm and the pace of your own breathing, noticing the length of your inhales and the length of your exhales as breath moves throughout your lungs, moves throughout your body. Noticing if your breath is fast or slow, noticing if it's deep or shallow. Just allowing yourself, without judgment, to just see what your breath is telling you about how you're feeling in this moment. And then when you're ready, you can bring your hands down to your belly, over your belly button, on either side of your belly button, and allow your palms to rest on your belly. And then on your next inhale, take a deep breath in, breathing in through your nose. And as you do, imagine filling your belly up with air like a balloon so that you can feel it expanding and pressing into your palms, even just a little. And when you've filled it up, as you exhale, release the breath out and feel your belly pulling in towards your spine, as if you're releasing all of that oxygen from your lungs. And then we'll do that again. Big belly breath, breathing in, filling your lungs up with air like a balloon. And big deep exhale as you release the oxygen out, feeling your belly pull in towards your spine, letting it all go. Another big deep breath in, filling your lungs up with air like a balloon. And big deep exhale out, releasing all the oxygen and pulling your belly in towards your spine. And then as you get into a relaxed rhythm of breath that's particular to you, we're going to move our hands from over our belly buttons to either side of our rib cage so that your palms are pressing into either rib cage on either side, on both sides. And then on your next inhalation, and as you breathe in, you're going to breathe into your belly, but then you're going to breathe that oxygen and fill that balloon up all the way up to your rib cage. So feeling your ribs expand and making some space in your rib cage. And then as you exhale again, you're going to pull your belly in towards your spine, releasing all that oxygen out. Another deep breath in, feeling your belly and then your ribs begin to expand with air, rib cage expanding and moving out. And then on your exhale, big deep release, feeling your belly moving in towards your spine. And then big deep inhale, filling belly and ribs up with oxygen. And big deep exhale out, releasing and letting go, letting go, letting go. And then the third part of the breath, so we did belly as first part, ribs as second part. The third part is right up below our collarbone, so palms right up to the top of your chest. And then this time when we breathe in, you're going to inhale, feeling your belly expand, your rib cage expand, and then feeling the oxygen expand all the way up to your chest, all the way up to your collarbone, all the way up to your throat, filling your belly, ribs, and chest with oxygen. And then when you exhale, like a wave descending, you're going to release the air from your chest, from your ribs, from your belly. And then like a wave rising, when you breathe in, you're going to fill the belly, the ribs, and the chest with oxygen. And big deep exhale, chest, ribs, and belly releasing, pulling in towards the spine. Big inhale, belly, ribs, and chest expanding. Big deep exhale, chest, ribs, and belly contracting and pulling into the spine. And then when you're ready, you can relax your hands down to wherever is comfortable, but continue this rhythm of breath, really visualizing that wave rising inside of you as you fill belly, ribs, and chest with air. And really feel the wave descending as chest, ribs, and belly release the oxygen from your lungs. Creating your own slow and steady rhythm of breath. However fast or slow your own particular wave is, but trying to slow it down, trying to fill yourself up completely with air on your inhale, and releasing on your exhale. Full breath in on your inhale. Full breath out on your exhale. And then just take a few more breaths like this on your own rhythm and pace. Letting your breath ground you, knowing that thoughts will show up and try to distract us and spin us out. Even body sensations can distract us. But use your breath as an anchor so that whenever you feel yourself spinning into something, a thought, sensation, a feeling, that you can, as you need to, return back to the breath as your anchor to ground you in whatever moment you're in. And then as you're ready, you can bring some energy back into the muscles of your body. If it's comfortable, wiggling your fingers and your toes, maybe gently shaking your head from side to side. And then if your eyes are closed, as you're ready, you can gently open them. Okay. So if you haven't and you want to, and you've joined us while we were doing the practice, folks are just sharing their pronouns, their name, where they're coming from in the country, in the world, into the chat box. So you can feel free to do that. Just a reminder to keep your microphone muted for now. We'll get into some conversation and dialogue as we go, and then when you're speaking, obviously unmute and then just mute back again. So again, everyone, welcome and thank you for joining tonight. The fact that there's so many people here obviously says something about the fact that some of the words or all of the words in the title of this interactive webinar offering resonated with people. I think it's safe to say that we're definitely in a collectively traumatic moment, and that can mean many different things. So I already see folks are from various parts of the country. And so for some people that may mean more close proximity to the impact of physical illness, of COVID's impact in a physical way, to people that you know or love, or that there's a density of the virus where you are, and so there can be fear and concern about the impact, even if it hasn't necessarily touched your own life yet. Whether or not we're in close proximity to the virus itself, there's also national and global impact that moves beyond that. That's about how we construct community, how we live with each other, how we handle things like isolation and loneliness. And then of course the financial impact, which is a macro impact that will affect the whole country for years to come, that is affecting all of us in this moment. And as I said in the beginning, for those of you that weren't already here, and I think it's important to reiterate again either way, is that whatever you are feeling in this moment is normal. We are in a collectively traumatic moment. And so whatever you're experiencing inside of you, emotionally and physically, is a normal response. The way that I most succinctly describe what trauma is it's a normal response to an abnormal set of circumstances. So this couldn't be more absolutely that thing, right? We're in an as abnormal set of circumstances as probably in this particular way any of us has experienced in our lifetime in this kind of manifestation. And so the response of being traumatized or experiencing things from a traumatic lens and framework is normal in the case of the world that we're currently living in, the lives that we're currently having to construct in completely new ways and very quickly. very rapidly. And that often is the nature of trauma as well, is that we don't see it coming, right? So it's not something we can equip and prepare for. And in a very literal way, we see that from the fact that there's a shortage on anything you might want to buy at any grocery store, right? On Amazon, I couldn't like find pretzels. I couldn't get to buy, actually to buy a giant like tub. I don't even know, it probably was like in a storage locker for years, this giant like never ending thing of pretzels, because that's when we hit a crisis like this so suddenly, we're not prepared, right? And then part of the stress and the fear and the panic also drives some of these things, like people just overbuying, right? The need to now equip ourselves, right? And this fear that comes out of uncertainty, because the truth is, in this kind of collective crisis, we literally don't know what tomorrow is going to look like and the day after that. We could, in our general daily life, we can make general assumptions about what tomorrow looks like. I know what my Tuesdays look like. I know what my Fridays look like. I know what my Saturdays look like. Right now, we're living on a very, not just a 24-hour cycle, but one that is very manic, socially manic, right? So if you have the news channel turned on, it's like it induces this kind of mania and panic for us at a collective level. Now, some of that's necessary, right? Like there's some specific information we need to know, but it also creates a frenzy. And so that frenzy gets replicated in all these ways. And so the shopping is the most sort of visceral way that I can think of, because literally, I'm just trying to get some basic groceries. I have some predisposition to lung issues. That's a real thing I have. So I'm really trying not to go outside. I'd rather not go to a grocery store. But like 2 weeks ago, I've always gotten my groceries delivered. Now nobody's delivering. I'm checking at like 6 a.m. to see if I can just get someone to bring me for a delivery for a handful of things. I'm in Chicago, and so it's an urban environment. It's very condensed. So the systems are now overwhelmed. And we're seeing that in all kinds of systems. And some of that also is mental, emotional health and wellness support, which is also one of my concerns, and one of the things that I'm hoping that this project track can support for community upcoming, is that some of the infrastructure of people's pre-existing emotional support doesn't exist in the same way. I was going around trying to build out this resource list for track, and just to have stuff that people like quick reference, right? Like I need this thing. How do I find it virtually now? Not everybody's done everything virtually. Some of us are more attuned, and some have not used as much virtual resources. And I went to NAMI's website, National Association for Mental Illness, and they have forever had a 24/7 hotline, where people that are in distress can call as a first line, as a bridge to secondary support like therapy. And on the front page of the website, it said, due to COVID, we don't have anybody manning the hotline right now, indefinitely. They have a voicemail system where people can leave a message and get a call back in 48 hours. Potentially 48 hours. So that's a big shift in terms of also what resources there are. That's a pretty critical frontline resource, for people that are going to be in distress, and folks are in more distress. So we're in a time that in and of itself is disrupting our lives. And again, anything we're feeling in this moment is a normal response to an abnormal set of circumstances. So even though I mentioned the rush on all these items, I also understand it. It's a normal response, right, to an abnormal set of circumstances. If I literally don't know what tomorrow is going to look like, I want to be prepared. And there's a sense of kind of a violation of ourselves by the universe. Like things were supposed to be a certain way. And that's also a traumatic experience. The things that I expected to be true are no longer true. That I'm living in a world in which there's a different set of rules, and nobody prepared me for this set of rules. So there's also an inner sense of being both violated and vulnerable by our environment, by our circumstances, by the world that we live in. And so things like rush on groceries is just a very, very easy example of, well, I don't know what to trust, right? Like, I don't know that I can trust that there will be toilet paper tomorrow, or that there's going to be whatever I need. And so now I need to take care of myself in abundance, because actually the world that I thought functioned a certain way no longer functions in that way. I was having a thought in the shower. I have a lot of my deep thoughts in the shower. It's also my only private time from the dogs, so these days it's critically important. And I think it was because I was in the shower, I was thinking about this particular client I had years ago, probably 12 years ago now. He was a combat veteran, young combat veteran from Iraq War. And he also had bipolar disorder. So I'll talk a little bit more about this, but if we have other things going on, when we're traumatized, it exacerbates and makes worse those things, right? So if we're already an anxious person, there it goes up. If we're already a depressed person, our mood's gonna swing down. If we're already a bipolar person, trauma triggers an exacerbation of whatever's going on. So for him, obviously, his combat trauma really made pronounced or made obvious his bipolar disorder. And so, and part of a big component of it, I think it was a combination of his experience of war and the way that war works, very much like the crisis that we're in. It takes the world that we thought we understood and it turns it upside down, and it makes everything we thought true not true anymore. That really one of the underlying ways that his mania was presenting was paranoia. He was very paranoid that something terrible was going to happen. He wasn't going to be prepared. And so he was stockpiling stuff, like bags of rice. And I think the reason I was thinking about it specifically in the showers, he was practicing, like, after the shower, leaving a baseline of water in the shower so that he could repeatedly wash himself, like a conservation of water effort for himself. And we spent a lot of time working on how to mediate his responses, that, that this level of paranoia wasn't equal to the actual danger in the world that he lived in, and I'm in the shower and thinking about all of this, just like a few days ago. And I'm like, oh, I get it now. Like I get where, maybe not the dirty shower water. I'm not doing that, but I'm sort of understand at a visceral level now, the lived experience of his paranoia, right? Because in many ways, while his was an abnormal response, right, to a more safe world at the time, really, that's where a lot of us are right now. Some version of that, right? Some iteration of that is like, it is paranoia, but what is it? There's a book series I read, and they constantly say, the phrase, it's not paranoia if they're really, after you, kind of thing. So it's not, in this moment, it's not paranoia to be worried about these tangible things. It's not paranoia anymore because our lived circumstances have shifted. Our world has shifted. And whether tomorrow, I guess science can say tomorrow will be a little more scary, and then the next day after that, we're going to get to a plateau where this will come down. But in the immediate, it is not paranoia to be scared, to be anxious, to be concerned about our basic needs being met, because we're compounding this physical illness also with a massive financial impact, a global and definitely national financial impact. And so our needs being met tomorrow is not a guarantee. So all of the things that we are feeling are perfectly natural in this moment. And I want to just kind of validate that, because I think depending on whether you live in community, if you live in a family, or if you are actually isolated in the sense that you're living in a home in which you're alone, we can spin out in our own heads, right? And be worried that we're losing it, or like, is this reaction normal? Is it too much? That kind of thing. So I just want to continue to validate that wherever you're at in your head, in your mind, in your body, in your spirit, is perfectly natural and normal for the moment that we're in, because we don't know what 6 hours is going to be like, right? 6 hours from now is going to be like. So all that to say that it is both an individual process, and it's also a collective process. That's a piece we can also share together, right? Because we're feeling it, but there's a community around the shared feeling of this moment, of this experience. And I do want to just touch briefly on what in mental health we call comorbidity, but that's a bit of a downer word. So anyway, all it really means is that when we experience one thing, it can exacerbate and make worse and add a second thing on it. So trauma is the baseline of what all of us are experiencing in some shape or form in this moment because of the state of things. Yeah. But the truth is that when we experience trauma, the other things in our lives can get more flared up, right? Like same thing like a medical illness, right? So if one part of our body has an inflammatory condition, we're inflamed, then another part of our body could get inflamed, or we could get a headache or that kind of thing. So the same thing is true about our emotional state, is that as we're in a collective place of trauma, we can experience the other things, maybe things that we already knew that were stressful for us, like being someone who feels anxiety really intensely, or being someone that feels lows, and depression intensely, those kind of things. Those can be, you can feel them more extremely in this moment. So I also want to say that that piece is normal too, is that anything else that you already may have going on, and that also includes body things, because our body and our minds are deeply connected. So there may be also body pain or illnesses or things that you already have going on for you, that the stress of the moment can also impact those things. So it's a moment for us to be extra sensitized for ourselves, and then in terms of checking on those people that we care about, to be checking in and just saying, how you doing? Is there anything I can do for you, for others? But also doing the same for ourselves. How am I doing this morning? How am I feeling? How is my body? How am I feeling in my mind, in my thoughts? Because sometimes also we don't necessarily know that we have a predisposition to feel our lows more intensely, or our highs more intensely, or our anxiety more intensely, until we get into a place of crisis or of trauma. So it also could be new things that you thought, oh, I've never felt like this before. But it's important to pay attention, because those things can shift in moments like this, and are just important for us to notice for ourselves, and then for those that are in our close surroundings. And at a certain point, it may also require getting additional support, right? So getting emotional support, getting someone that you can check in with to make sure you're still feeling like you can manage where you're at, in terms of your own stress level. And the other thing is, if we've experienced trauma before in our life. So if you've had other traumatic experiences, one of the things when there's a collective or a large scale trauma is that it might even be something that you thought you worked through, like a traumatic thing happened 10 years ago, and maybe you got support, you got help some way, shape, or form, and you feel like it's okay, I'm good, I haven't dealt with that forever. And it can actually kind of pop up unexpectedly and be totally unrelated to what's happening now, but be something that's traumatic, that kind of, there's a piece of it that got stuck right in your sort of memory system, in your body system, and it can be exposed in this moment. So also to say that that is normal, but that's also why it's important to pay attention to what's showing up. Where are your thoughts going? Are there troubling dreams that are showing up or memories from the past? When 9/11 happened, there was a huge surge in hotline calls to sexual assault hotlines, because even though 9/11 had absolutely nothing to do with sexual assault specifically, it was a collectively experienced trauma that essentially what it did for a mass number of people erupted their traumatic memory, things that they didn't realize, pieces of this other trauma from their past that was unresolved, that they didn't realize was. And so just being really sensitive to what's showing up, knowing that it's normal for whether it's mood, whether it's memory, whether it's past trauma, to be felt, maybe feeling like it's out of the blue, is a normal thing to happen in a collective crisis, but also paying attention to when it needs to have more focus, right? So do you need to get additional support? And in this moment, additional support looks different, right? So when we have needs that need to be met in this moment, it's gonna function a little bit differently. It's gonna look a little bit different. And luckily, I think many people, care providers, have activated around shifting to what the moment needs. And so I'm seeing everywhere, everything from like somatic experiencing providers to yoga teachers to mental health therapists who are offering virtual therapy, telehealth type therapy and care, and other holistic care, and many of whom are also doing it at sliding scale and lower cost fees. So something also I'll share at the end, I'll share a series of links for different things from Track, but one of them is a resource guide. So I've been trying to build up some of those resources so that it can be something that people can see what's available. And it is only a short, I mean, every day I see more people saying, oh, I'm doing this, or do people need that? So it'll be a continuing growing list. And additionally, if you know of other things, please let me know, or post things in the chat box that you know folks are doing. But we need to pay attention to what our needs are in this moment, because our needs are going to be different. The people and our loved ones' needs are going to be different than they were 3 weeks ago. And things are going to potentially show up for people that you weren't necessarily expecting. And so just being really aware of kind of where we are, what we're holding in this moment, and that it might change tomorrow. You know, you might not be at a sort of maximum stress today, but maybe in 3 days, something does pop up, and it's okay. But also, we just need to be aware of when it needs attention. And again, as this is a collective experience, it's creating a new normal, right? In many different ways. It's creating a new normal around how people are getting by in terms of everything from groceries to paying bills, the stress of potentially not being able to pay bills. The new normal is virtual contact versus physical person-to-person contact. A colleague and friend of mine, Ana Gelsi Velasco Sanchez, she's a painter, and she's been working on, you know, different pieces in this time that she's home a lot. And she just finished a new canvas that said, you know, something to the effect that we need touch. And I think we don't factor in how valuable touch is until it becomes something that is inaccessible like this. And again, in this profoundly collective way in which who we can touch, you know, who is in our immediate physical sphere or not. As somebody who lives alone, with my dogs, you know, so I can touch them, that's fine. But, you know, I feel acutely for other folks who are completely isolated, right? So not even having a household or a family unit, because touch is so important. And when we pull that away, even that alone has such an impact on our emotional, spiritual, physical wellness in ways that studies have been done about touch. You know, there's information out there on why it's important, but we've never had this weird kind of social experiment of really being deprived of it in a very visceral way. And for folks that are, you know, I know folks that are in households with other people who are sick. So even being in a physical household with somebody in this moment doesn't even necessarily mean that they are somebody that you can have touch space with, or somebody who's especially vulnerable, who you can't actually go near, even if you are in the same household, because you have to make sure that you're not sick before you can connect with them. And so just thinking about the ways in which our own emotional state is impacted, our own experience of the world is impacted by this sort of restriction or lack of or complete inaccess to touch, has been really a profound impact. And so it's beautiful that we can connect virtually in all these ways, but I think there's valid space and necessary space also to grieve the things that we lose living in the environment that we're in. And so a piece of, you know, so we are not in a post-traumatic stress place because we're still in the trauma zone, in the trauma environment and the trauma experience right now collectively. But there's also things we can do that are important to hold the space of how intense it is, to acknowledge, to ritualize the experience that we're going through. And acknowledging and ritualizing grief, I think, is a key component to dealing with trauma. There's so much to grieve. You know, there's, again, the flip side, there's also things that are beautiful and wonderful and that have cropped up in amazing ways. But I want to validate grief in this moment, and the necessity for us to be able to give ourselves space, our loved ones space, our community space to grieve the things that we don't have right now. You know, everything from a loss of a job to the loss of physical connection to the people that we love the most. Many people are at great distances from the people they love. You know, my parents are in New Jersey, as is my brother and his whole family. My sister's in Florida. Those distances didn't feel quite as acute. You know, it felt like, oh, but of course I can easily get there if I wanted to any day. But the distance feels different. And so the loss of connection, the grief of that, whether it's physical touch or just the literal distance between the people that we care about that are just not accessible to us in so many different ways in this moment. I think it's important to hold grief as much as we try to find the moments to celebrate, you know, and the things that pop up that are beautiful or that are funny, which also out of traumatic experience, those things happen too, right? These amazing moments of beauty, right? People singing on the balcony together in Italy. Where was it? In Minnesota? Was it Minnesota yesterday? A bunch of people putting on those giant dinosaur suits and having a parade. A friend of mine, Spirit, in New Orleans, doing live streaming them playing their cello, these beautiful music last night. You know, people doing like, what is it called? Club quarantine dance parties. You know, real-time Instagram dance parties, things that I didn't even know were possible. That also, there are things that I didn't even know were a thing. I also don't really understand Instagram, so I'm learning new things. But like those things pop through too, right? So the grief is also balanced by this beautiful, sometimes also tear-inducing joy and love and kindness, you know, and all of those things too. And so we can hold the tension of both of those, but acknowledging that they're both of them are born of this trauma of the moment. You know, both of them are born out of a particular kind of unique pain that we're living in and living into right now. And from that, always from these collective experiences of trauma, some most beautiful and amazing things that would have never been created exactly as they are show up, and some really painful grieving, losses, and suffering also shows up. And holding that balance in our everyday life when we're very much bound to screens, right, in this moment, to give us all of that information too, as a unique experience. So whether the screen is the TV and the 24-hour CNN, or the screen is the internet, is we're also experiencing all of this up and down of our feelings, you know, from 1 minute to the next of our day in this very unique way. And sometimes still very isolating way, you know, so it's beautiful to be able to see music, and then it can also, like, happening in real time across the country with somebody we care about. And then also there can be grief even in that it's sad, you know, that also you're still alone, and that also that person is still so far away. So we hold all of those pieces together. And I see also, I just want to notice that people are making chat comments, and I'm trying to view them as I go, but I also recommend other people check the chat or write in the chat as you're feeling, as things show up, to sort of connect in the conversation. And we're going to go into some collective conversation in a moment. But I wanted to just take a few deep breaths together again, like we did before, but just kind of pause, hold what we've talked about already, let it sit, and take a big deep inhale in and a big deep exhale out. Big deep inhale in, big deep exhale out. One more big deep breath in, and big exhalation out. So I'll talk a little bit more also about additional care practices, and I would also love to hear, as we go into some more conversation, what other people are doing in this moment to take care of themselves. But the one thing that I want to or a couple of things I want to note specifically that I think can be helpful, again, coming out of that idea that we're getting so much information, so much stimulation in this virtual way, you know, from media way, whether it's TV, whether it's social media, whether it's Zoom calls. I think there's also a moment where it's important to set boundaries for ourselves, right? Because we could watch CNN and that sort of illness ticker, the virus ticker go, you know, until 3 a.m. And I'll be honest, I've been inclined to do that on a certain day, you know. I was somebody actually I intentionally didn't have a news channel up until like a week ago. And then I realized, oh crap, there's all this important information coming out on the news. And so I should probably get that. So I got Sling TV for now. For now, I say, because I don't like having the news accessible to me. For the first time, I've had real-time news accessible to me for the first time in 3 years. And it's been really anxiety inducing. It's terrible. The news is, I mean, it's just a terrible machine of populating our already stressed brains with like the worst possible scenario. And like each new show comes in and someone else brings a new expert to talk about their worst possible scenario of what could happen. The news is terrible. And I feel really validated for not having watched it for 3 years. And then I also feel like, yes, there's some critical necessity right now to know certain things in real time. But I've had to set boundaries for myself, right? Because I could get really sucked in and be like, oh, no, I know I just saw Wolf Blitzer tell me all the terrible things, but Anderson Cooper's on next, and he's also going to tell me all the terrible things, and I can't miss that broadcast. Or there's going to be like the 35th press briefing from the White House, and I can't miss any of that information or some of the horror show of what happens in those press briefings. But I am really, really trying to set my boundaries. And this is something even particularly actually similar to social movement trauma. So doing that work for a number of years, it's a similar boundary set that I've talked to a lot of people about doing for themselves. Because if you're in the middle of like a movement crisis, you could be doing that. You're on Twitter all night. What just happened? Oh, this protest. You could get so super wound up and just never shut down. And that can be, and because again, we're already talking about it, we have a baseline trauma that we're all experiencing in this moment, but we can personally exacerbate it and make it worse for ourselves, right? And so having a nonstop inundation of information can make it worse. And it goes back to the balance again. It's important for us to be connected. It is important for us to get some basic information. It's important for us to be on social media in this moment for many of us, maybe not for everyone, but for many of us, as a means of connection and community. And also, there has to be a point at which we kind of dim down our day, right? And allow our mind to slow down, allow the pace of what we're taking in to slow down, and also allow ourselves to live outside of a world that is completely absorbed by what is happening right now, right? So yesterday I made a really intentional effort to watch 2 movies I've been wanting to watch. I have nothing to do with anything, but I really just wanted to watch them. So it's important to also dim down from, yes, like, and in 5 hours, I can also find out the same information, or I can check back in with my friends online. But can I have some time that isn't all consumed with what is happening in the world in this moment? So I like the language of dimming down, finding this way to kind of dim the lighting on the intensity, dim the lighting on our level of stimulation. And so when are the blocks of time in my day? And this goes to another key component that I think is important, building out a rhythm of what life looks right now. Because even if you were a person, like I'm a person that's done half of my work from home and then half of my work out in the world. And so even as somebody who had some kind of a rhythm for what it looked like to be home, being home all the time in this specific way has to look very different. And it is very different. So building out a rhythm of your day, of your life, like what does Monday look like? And what are the things that can have some consistency? Are there practices? Are there ways that I'm grounding myself that I start and end my day? Are there rituals? Do I have an altar in my home that is important to me that I want to spend time with in the evening? And actually, writing down on paper, building out, what do I want my day, the rhythm of my day, the rhythm of my life right now to look like? And building into that can be the ethos around, and these are the times, these are the pockets I want to shut off all of the noise, good and bad, right? But all of the noise, where I don't want to be watching TV, where I don't want to be on social media. Like maybe it's 12 to 2, and maybe it's any time before 8 a.m., and maybe it's any time after 9 p.m. Whatever those things are that work for you, but building out a rhythm of life, particular to what works for you, that includes a balance of nurturing ourselves in all the ways that we can. So what do I want to eat today? What do I want to put in my body? Also, that is balanced by what is actually in my kitchen, and can I get groceries or not, right? So that might also require some creativity. but nurturing our body. What am I putting in my body today? What do I want that to look like? Because again, we're living in a world in which the external universe is chaotic and unknown. We cannot know what 3 hours look like or 3 days look like right now. We just can't. And that can become maddening. So making the universe of what we can, and I don't want to use the word control because it feels very kind of stifling, but what we can manage ourselves, what a rhythm that we can build out that isn't contingent on all the other unknowns, can also be a way in and of itself to ground ourselves, right? Is that I know I want to get up at this time every day, and I'm going to do this grounding practice. And I know I want to go to sleep around this time, and I want to do this ritual or this altar practice or whatever the rhythm is that works for you at the end of my day. Those are the things that we can build that then we can count on in our lives, that we're helping to manifest and to create for ourselves. And in that, we can set some of those boundaries of when we don't want things to be too much, when we want to slow down and dim down moments and periods in the rhythm of our life, in the rhythm of our day. Those are the things we can manage. And in that way, there's an ability to pay more attention to ourselves. So that, going back to what I said before about noticing what's coming up, that we can have moments where we can really pay attention. What is my body telling me right now? What are my feelings telling me right now? And maybe also needing to alter around how it feels different. One day may feel really tough, and that may look like I want to wear my pajamas and I want to wear my fuzzy socks and I want to curl in a ball on the couch for 4 hours and be like kind of in a half nap. That can also be okay too. So building the rhythm is good. And then also knowing those moments where actually everything is too much. I just want to lay down for 3 hours, and giving yourself the permission to also make those exceptions as you need them. But building that rhythm will also help to pay attention, to pay that inward attention to what's showing up and what we need in any given particular moment. So I want to pause there and open up space for folks to share things that are resonating with you. I know some folks have been writing some wonderful things down about that. But share what you're feeling right now, share what's been coming up as I've been talking, and or some folks have already been sharing things that they're doing for themselves. So feel free to also share that. And you can do that when you're ready, you can do that via mic. So turn your mic on and feel free to speak into the space, obviously one at a time. Any thoughts, questions, or reflections?
So I'll go. My name is Isis Benitez. I'm from Poughkeepsie, New York. I'm on this call for Planned Parenthood of Greater New York. And one thing that really resonates with me is that I'm also a Marist College student. I go to Marist College, I commute, and I'm a senior, so I'm supposed to be graduating in May. And it's scary for me to realize, like, am I having a ceremony? Am I not? That's one of the things, like, I invited everyone to my graduation ceremony because Marist's graduations are very public, or completely 100% public. They told me that they have like 10,000 people normally attend those graduations. And I'm like, well, this is the moment I've been waiting for. And now it's like taken away from me. I wasn't one to really be involved on campus, I'm not gonna lie, but I want that experience of that ceremony. I had my high school graduation ceremony, I can have my college graduation ceremony, and it is such a big fear. And I literally email them every day in regards to, like, is it canceled? I'm hearing rumors, like, what's going on? This college got canceled, that college got canceled. Like, I'm so scared. So it's like, that really resonates with me. And I literally have cried to, like, my boyfriend, to my mom about it, because it's like really scary for me. That, and like, we're literally on lockdown in my house. My mom just started to work from home, which is very different because she's never had to work from home my whole life. And when she comes home, it's like a big deal. And then, like, my family, we're not one to be around each other that much. We love each other, but I want to be around each other. So for us to be around each other all the time, and we just got so much going on, and it's like, I'm working from home, my mom's working from home, my brother's got out of a job because of this, my grandma's a 92-year-old woman, she wants to bounce off the walls and leave. It's very different for us. So it's just like a big shift for all of us. So
Thank you, Isis, for sharing. And I'm sure many of the things you said resonated with other folks. I mean, just being stuck in a house, right? Where people normally are coming and going and you can be in each other's space, but not on top of each other. That's such a huge shift for a family. And I just really want to also acknowledge like uh, the that sort of the pain and the not knowing about something that's so important, like a graduation ceremony is huge, and there's a reason why there is a whole ceremony and ritual practice around that, is because it's important, it's valuable, and to have people there uh, that are graduating with you, and the people that care and love you being there as well, and it's that um, the unknown, right? You can't, like, you can call every day and they don't know, and so you can't know, and so there's nothing even to hold on to of at least knowing yes or no. And so I think there's so much ambiguity and unknown stuff in this moment, so I'm holding that, the pain of that for you. I'm with you.
How many of you on here have the stay at home orders in your states? Um, I think that's the hardest challenge. I know I work with kids, so with 341 kids that I'm used to being around, the challenge has been just trying to connect with those families and make sure that they have access to resource, but also recognizing um, are underdocumented families who have access to nothing, and that really burdens my heart really heavy because they don't have anywhere to turn. um, and so consistently calling, so carrying the burdens of the fear of this. I'm chronically ill, my husband's chronically ill, my father-in-law has COPD. Luckily he doesn't like going anywhere, so we do all his shopping, but now we've been quarantined in my own family because my son works in a hospital and had been sick. So we just had a self quarantine. But even the fear that comes with, not necessarily fear, the concern that comes with possibly being a carrier because I'm chronically ill and infecting somebody else, um, and when you're a servant at heart, I think that's what bothers me the most, that I can't go out and do what I do, my community work, and be there for my community like I want to for safety reasons, and I get it, but it's the biggest challenge I have, protecting my own family and protecting their family, trying to get them resources over the phone. And the computer is good. Thank goodness we have this technology and that we can connect from all over the world this way. But it is traumatic. And kind of there's moments I do really, really well, and then now I'm having trouble sleeping, which I haven't had trouble sleeping in a long time, um, which is really hard.
Thank you, Sonia, for sharing that. I think yeah, first of all, sleeplessness, some version of stress insomnia is a big, I think a lot of people are or will experience some version of that, because there's just so much, right? There's so much happening inside and out. It's hard to shut that down enough to feel calm, to feel rested, to feel all those things we need to be able to fall asleep. And I feel for your just that inability to do what you want to do the way you want to do to help people, and and the fact that the system is set up not to support underdocumented folks, and in this moment makes it so hard to not be able to tangibly, I know as a social worker, to not physically be able to show up and get somebody what they need or get them to where they need to be. And that also in that way, it's this weird, like, sort of double bind, right? You are protecting other people by not doing that, going out in the world, and at the same time you can't protect them in these very specific ways that you're felt called to and that your work is to do in the world. And so I, I know from a lot of folks in the care provider roles across the board, it's really hard in this moment not to tangibly be able to show up in so many of the ways that we're used to showing up for folks. So thank you for sharing that.
Hi. Um, I'm Lauren. I'm in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We just had an order to stay home today from our governor for all non-essential. Healthcare is essential, so I'm still going to work. A lot of clinics have moved to teletherapy. We are working on it. We've done phone sessions, but I'm still going to the office, so I share a lot of fear with all of you and with our populations as well, which again, I think you mentioned, Teresa, like we can tap into that consciousness even though it's scary. We're in it together. And then just what you were saying, Sonia, you know, what can I do? I can't reach out to these people. Like, I can't help them, right? And they're underserved. I think that something that I've learned is like, even if you can't have that access in the way that you normally have, you're playing a role, and you're playing it like from the inside out. So whoever you communicate with, touch, verbally, visually, you know, whatever you're still putting that out from you out, and it will go out the way that as it shall, right? So you can't always control how things land, but you can have intention with what you put out. So I think even just having, you know, your energy about it is very intentional and very important. And you have your family, and you're taking care in a certain way, and the way that you take care will let others take care, you know? So I think everyone plays an equally important role in this. And yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Lauren, for sharing where you're at in terms of physically in your state, being at the stay-at-home orders, but then at the same time being a healthcare provider. And so actually having a very different role and rhythm right now in this moment. And thank you for the work that you're doing, being out there. And thank you for the words you said around Sonia. I think that's the truth across the board, is we can't help the ways that we want to necessarily, but we can help in the ways that we can, and that those ways have such a great impact.
Hi, my name's Melissa, and I'm here in Olympia, Washington. Hopefully y'all can see me and hear me, I don't know. And one of the things that's been coming up for me a lot is that I have chronic illness, and I've really had to struggle and fight with the institution that I work at to get paid time off, to get shared leave. And now I'm seeing like these institutions, a lot of these institutions have had the ability, right, all along to provide this kind of care, to provide the resources that people need who are chronically ill to be able to stay home, work from home, have reduced schedules and still be making full-time pay. And so I have this like frustration and this anger about that. And at the same time, this fear of it going back to the way it was before. And also this hope that maybe it won't, that maybe it will open up the door to more resources. And so I think I'm holding this space. I like what you said earlier about the ambiguity of this fear and this hope at the same time. So I just wanted to name that.
Thank you, Melissa, for sharing that. I think as somebody also has chronic illness and talking to other folks, that has been definitely a strong resonance, right? Is like living in a world in which the same things aren't accessible in the same ways, and how much people have had to fight for some of those basic needs to be met. And then all of a sudden in 3 days, the whole world goes online, right? And goes at distance. And then all of those things that were thought not to be possible, or at least systems made difficult, are all of a sudden super accessible, right? And the transparency of that in this moment, I think, is important regardless, right? It's like and it's holding both of that, right? It is the both and of either side, and the ambiguity is that there's lots of things visibilized that we see now, you know, particularly about how people can have access, and how, oh yeah, the electric company can hold your bill if you're in financial hardship, you know, all those kind of ways. Various marginalized experiences were not supported before, but actually the systems can it's possible. So I resonate with the both end of that.
I also just wanted to add on to that. I'm seeing things happen at Rikers that people said could never happen, where we're like there are people trying to work to release 100 LGBTQ incarcerated folks, which is problematic in and of itself, right? Because they're sort of washing their hands of their responsibility to care for them. And also it's really not a safe place for them to be ever, but especially right now in terms of spreading germs. But like very quickly, there was all of a sudden the ability to release all of these people who many of which are in there for like petty crimes, sex work, things of that nature. So yeah, I think it's been really intriguing as someone who sort of, I guess I sort of think of myself as like a revolutionist and like what, like this other world that's possible. And like, we can't and shouldn't go back to the way it was before, especially when we see how overnight things can change. And I will say one place that I'm drawing a lot of hope from, one of the only places I'm drawing a lot of hope from in this moment, is how powerful I hope that like people realize we are when like we come together. I'm specifically thinking of, in other circumstances, if there wasn't a virus right now and we all decided to just stay home, how impactful that could be, and how many changes we could sort of fight for and probably successfully win. I know that's obviously not the circumstances here, but I'm hoping that like after this situation, when things become safer and more stable, that people remember like how powerful it was for all of us to sort of strike it, so to speak.
Thank you, Ethan, for that. Yeah, and I think that's talking about prisons, that's such another example, right, of what is possible, where we thought, or the system disallowed the possibility before. So I appreciate you sharing that as an inspiration, and also as an inspiration for what is possible with collective power, right? So what we can do together, and again, is really unique to this moment, but there is a lot that can be held on to. So there's the good stuff, right, that can be held on to, about how community aligns, supports each other, how organizations, institutions actually can support a better version of the world. And of course, won't necessarily stay this way in this way, but it gives a vision of something as well. So that piece is also true, along with the trauma of the moment and the crisis of the moment. Thank you. Anything else? Any questions about any of the things I said, or reflections on any of that, or just, I know folks are sharing as well in the chat about what you're doing in this moment to stay grounded, but you feel free to also share that. I saw somebody said we need to keep the online dance parties going. Yeah, I missed out on the one last night because I don't understand how Instagram works, and I was really sad. So I really hope there are more dance parties online. When it's just me and my dogs dancing, it's very uncomfortable. They mostly just stare at me. And thank you, Lily. I see you said you want to, you could be added to the resource guide. That's wonderful. Yeah. So anybody also, well, I'm going to talk a little bit more about TRACK before we close out in a little bit here, and about the resource guide and about other resources too. But before we get to that, any other thoughts, questions, reflections?
I'll pipe in.
Yeah.
I'm MP in Seattle, Washington. And we've been in the thick of things for weeks, a month, something like that. So I work for a social services nonprofit. So I've been thinking a lot, especially as someone who does have, some security and privilege and access. I've been thinking about ways to care for the caretakers right now, right? Like, we have a lot of people who are doing more work, doing more frontline work, and shifting their duties, as I'm sure, Lauren and other healthcare workers can speak to as well. And I'm thinking about, not just the tangible, practical ways of helping with groceries and stuff, but as someone who's here to support our other staff, what it looks like to offer care as a community to folks who are actually being more taxed and more pressed right now.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think there's various levels of care and support, right, that are going to be even more needed. There are going to be care providers in various ways that are going to be more taxed. And then those care providers are also going to need more support. So I think that's a good question just in general in terms of, we don't know how long this particular structure and system of existence is going to be. But even a couple of weeks is long enough, right, for folks to get really, really taxed. And we just don't know beyond that.
I hate talking on the computer, so sorry about this. But especially that's going to be fun with my telesessions, right? But anyway, one of the questions that I have is, we are, as a provider, I work with trauma, I work with anxiety and depression. Usually the first thing we try to provide is a holding environment of basic safety. And this is something that feels so lacking right now. So as a provider trying to give some sense of that, hopefully internal holding environment for folks, how do you suggest we go about this when we really, even some of them can be in their homes and they don't have a safe space to even access our sessions and not feel like, or feel like can be heard and that not feel threatened by their environment. So I wonder what everyone's thoughts are around this.
Yeah, I can speak to that briefly, and then I'd also be glad to hear how other folks are trying to manage that in this moment. I think there's so much complexity around that, like from what you said, everything from physical space, literally, does somebody have physical space to have the level of safety of just privacy, and then to even have a session, or just the safety of self, right, for folks that are already traumatized. And I think, like so much of our world right now, it's a matter of getting smaller, right? Like about what our expectations are about what we can offer people when we think about safety. And actually there's a language a colleague of mine started using that I prefer to safety, which is called protected, instead of safe space, protected space. And I like that because it's built on, as I've kind of utilized it, it's built on this mutual agreement that we're going to try to be protective of one another and ourselves to our best ability, with the knowledge that the world is not safe. So obviously even this environment less so, but that safety is in some ways an illusion, right? The absolute safety we can't give somebody else and we can't verify it's true. So even some of the framework about just expectations that, honestly acknowledging we can't verify safety, but what we can do is mutually agree to protect the space as much as we can for each other. And then making the expectations smaller, meaning that it may not be a private room, but where do you feel like you're most protected in the environment that you're physically in? And it may not be the ideal, right? Especially in psychotherapy where folks are used to one-on-one, everything is private and then private and then private on top of that, right? Like sound machine outside the door, space with the door closed. We have a lot of those illusions of what's possible have to be shattered to be able to provide any care in this moment, because it can't look like that. But how do we protect what we can? Is it literally a corner of the quietest room? And is there a way that they can create some kind of barrier so they feel like they have a physical space, with the acknowledgement that somebody might hear what they say? And then again, the world gets smaller. So maybe what you work on with folks can't be the same level of a disclosure, right? That it may go back to the basics, which people are going to need more of now. The basics are, how do I protect myself in my body? Like, so how do we give them small practices? So the breath practice we did in the beginning is an example of a small way to create some protection and support. So I think everything kind of has to minimize down, and our expectations of what's possible, both minimize and expand. The expansive part is that we get to think outside of what we thought were the necessary boundaries of what we have to do this, right? Now it's, what can we get? What can we get? What is possible? How do we get to what's possible within this framework? And how do we get smaller? Because people that are already traumatized are going to be triggered. And so everything like just being able to help them ground, help them acknowledge what they're feeling right now, may not be about going into deep, intense traumatic history. It may not be about, bringing up new levels of emotion, but just in this moment, in this minute. And one of the things I've been telling to people, because we can spin out so fast, even thinking a day ahead in the world that we're in, is also to how do we keep people's vision of what they're looking at right now small. Just think about the next hour, and then think about the hour after that. What are you going to do to get through that? Not think a week out, because a week out is vast right now. And that's for all of us. A week out is too far. How do we think about what today looks like? And even some of those ritual practices I explained about creating a rhythm, right? For folks that are traumatized, to have something that is static and is that they can count on, that they have physically on a paper. I get up, I do this, can be really, really grounding right now when everything feels like a trauma trigger. So that's my sharing. Anyone? Yeah, somebody also mentioned Mickey Scott Bay Jones' work on Brave Space, which comes from Brene Brown's work that talks broadly about or defined brave space, and then folks have used that, and Mickey's work around that is great. Yeah, that's another kind of languaging outside of safe space too, is this courageous kind of space to hold. So anyone else, I know you said, does anybody have any advice? So anyone else wanted to share, how to support people in this time, or if you're doing that work?
Just to go off again, it's different too when you're like forced to stay home. I don't know if we talked about that. I don't remember, but like when you're like forced to stay home, it's totally different than when you wanted to stay home. It like you said earlier, like in the beginning or something like that. It's like beyond different. So like for all of us as young adults and as adults, even probably like someone like the teenagers, older teenagers, because some kids may or may not get it, and if they do, it could be traumatizing for them because they can see their parents freak out having to like homeschool them and juggle. It's like totally different when you're literally forced. It's like you're back and you're like 5 years old and your mom's telling you you're grounded. It is totally different when you're an adult or young adult. I'm a young adult, so it's like it's just like a whole different like universe. And it's like they're just even looking. I keep using my grandma, but like my grandma is like a perfect example because she's 92, so she's from the working age, so she really wants to keep doing everything in the world, and we keep telling her to sit down and she can't. Like, so it's like we're trying to like calm her down, and she has not been outside since I think last Monday. It's totally like, no, not last Monday, 2 Mondays ago, or something like that, 2 Wednesdays ago. She has not been outside, and she like can't garden. She feels she's a no. So it's just a different world for all of us.
Yeah, I thank you for bringing that back to it. I think you used the word forced, but like that mandatory, right? And I like the example of comparing it to being grounded, right? It's like we're all grounded right now. Like stay in your room, you're not allowed to leave. And it also creates a different relationship with the human world around us. I mean, if you have to, everyone you see on the street, you have to look at and be like, am I 6 feet away from you? Are you 8 feet away from you? Did I see you cough? Is that small child ill? Like, it can also spin us out in terms of like how we just live in the world, right? And even if we can physically get outside, like you said, your grandma, 92, also the more impaired you are, the less that sphere of even movement is, right? Like, so I see some people are like, oh, I went to the park today, and like I went on this nature hike, and I'm like, I'm just getting over bronchitis. I have lung impairment and other autoimmune functions. I'm like, I don't want to really walk past my block right now, because there's a level of being compromised that I also have to take into account in terms of my body and what level of, like, what distance from my home, what level of risk is that, getting in my car is in the parking garage, which is next to the train, which has a lot of people, anyway. So also thinking about, I think it is important to think about the impact on our emotional being and even just our like general lives on this idea of mandatory, right? And the reason it being mandatory, also being because of illness, it makes our world much smaller. And that gets back also to, my suggestion around trauma care is that also everything has to get a little bit smaller, more concrete, more grounding. And we can't necessarily do the bigger things. We just make it smaller, make it simpler, find that way to create protected space. And I think that's the protected space piece, I think, can be universal. Like, how are we doing that for ourselves in our daily life? How are we doing that for ourselves in our family life? What does protected space for ourselves look like in this moment? Let's see. Oh, Trey Ronnie said, I've been thinking about the potential value of 12 steps structure in this moment. And I'd love people's thoughts about this idea. I think that's a great also thing to bring up, just to reflect on. I had, there's a friend of mine, colleague who's been in AA for a long time. She's very public about it. And she sent me, for the resource guide, a listing of all of these newly added online ANA meetings around the globe. So there's like one in New York, one in DC, one in London, one in Los Angeles, and you can go to any of them, right? Because they're virtual. So she was like, I was just on an AA meeting in London last night. And I think actually thinking about the AA model just of doing community is actually really valuable in this moment, because AA is really good at peer support, right? How do we support each other in hard places, and how do we show up? And I think that's exhibited by the fact that, like, a minute into this, sort of shutdown of access, AA has all these meetings already available, because it is there, the ethos of AA and NA is built on our lives are contingent on this interconnection, right? Like our sobriety, therefore our lives are contingent. We can't lose that. We cannot lose community. So how do we make it happen? How do we make it work? What is the way to create protected space? And so I think, I definitely think recovery has some good stuff for all of us to use in terms of community support and peer support in this moment. So we're coming close up to the 7:30 time, and I want to be conscious of folks' time. I also was only able to check over and see a handful of comments, but I want to acknowledge that there are so many more in there, and really appreciate and support. And I'm going to store the comments so that I make sure that I get to see everything that everybody said. I'm super appreciative of everybody being involved in this. I think for ourselves, for our communities, and for those of us that are still working in roles that are serving others. And I think honestly, right now we are all in roles that are serving others, whether it's professionally or literally in our household. That I'm appreciative that you all spent this time here. This was intended to be kind of opening the conversation about and acknowledging the trauma of the moment, the crisis of the moment. I think sometimes we make the word trauma feel like a dirty word, like it's negative to say or it's derogatory. I don't feel like that. I feel like it's just an honest representation of an experience, and that there's power in acknowledging what an experience is, so that we can understand it, so that we can navigate it, so that we can be in community and reflect on it. It is healing for me to hear other people resonate with the moment we're in, and me hear something that resonates with how I'm living in this moment as somebody else speaks into it. So I'm very appreciative of that. So TRAC, again, trauma response and crisis care for movements, is going to be intentionally doing some projects and programming in the upcoming weeks to try to do some of this support. We have some framework for infrastructure for that. And so we thought it would be a moment where people could use some support, right? And that's a thing that we can navigate in some way. So I would like to share a few things for everyone to have. And also for you to know, there's a Track for Movements Facebook page, Twitter, and Instagram. And so we'll also, any resource I'm going to share right now in the chat box, but they'll also be uploaded and available there. So if you miss copying it or clicking on it before we log off, it'll be available. So the first thing I want to offer up is this, the resource guide I'm talking about. Now, this is something that I really hope continues to grow. I'm sure it will, not just from me, but if anybody has, so if you are a provider of some kind of virtual care that you would like to offer up for folks, or if you know of resources that are popping up in your social media feed or your email box, if you can email us at, I'm putting the email in the chat box, trackformovements@gmail.com. That would be great. I would like to continue growing this resource list, and some of you out there are doing this kind of work for folks online. So if you're individually or even your organization is offering something, or there's a workshop that's going to be online coming up, any of that kind of stuff, please feel free to share with me through this email so that we can add it to the list. Lydia, do you want to say hello right now? So Lydia is helping with admin support for track, and I just want to have everybody see who she is, because if you send emails to us, they'll go to Lydia. You could see her maybe.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi. Good to see everyone and hear you tonight. Yeah. And thanks, Teresa.
Thank you, Lydia. So she'll be the frontline person gathering those emails that folks send in. So first is the resource list. That's also for you to use. If there's good stuff in there that is useful for you, feel free to take it and use it. In there will also be a continuing list of track specific stuff that we're offering. So if you click on the resource list, you'll also be able to see that we have a few different things that are upcoming that we want to offer to folks. And I'm gonna just open that up. I'm gonna open share my screen so you can see it. Let's see. Sorry, for some reason it's acting wonky. Shoot, it won't let me share my screen. That's unfortunate. I just updated my OS, the stupid new Mac program. Anyway, I had too much time on my hands, so I update a thing, and now it won't let me do a bunch of things, and it's really frustrating. So anyway, if you can click on the link, that would be great. If not, when you get a chance to click on the resources guide, you'll be able to see we're going to start another team member from track, Alyssa Caddis, who's a LCSW, is going to start offering Thursday evenings weekly group community EMDR. So for those of you that don't know what EMDR is, it's a particular kind of method of reducing stress around traumatic experience. So very kind of appropriate for this moment. But she's actually going to be doing a group version of that online for free for folks. Each week it will be limited to 12 participants. So if it's something that you're interested in participating in, maybe testing it out, it's something new to you, you can Google EMDR to learn a little bit more about it. Also in the resource guide, there's a bit of a description of what it is and how you prepare for it. But if you're interested in joining for this Thursday or next Thursday, send us an email also at the Track for Movements. Again, it'll be 12 people per session. We're hoping to keep this going as long as it serves folks. So sign up sooner than later if you're interested in doing that, and it will be a group Zoom format for that. Also next week, I will have the information up shortly. There'll be Jade Perry, who works with me on my other organizational project, the Mystic Soul Project, will be offering Tuesday a ancestral grounding sort of virtual workshop for folks that want to engage deeper with that in this moment as a way of grounding yourself. So that will also pop up on our social media channels and in the resource guide once I get her the exact time for that, with also a Zoom link. And then the final thing, then two more things I wanted to share.
Teresa, can I ask you?
Oh yeah.
For the EMDR, is that like for practitioners, or can we refer our patients to?
You can refer yes, it's for community members. So it's not a training for practitioners, it's practice, EMDR. So yeah, if you have folks that you would like to refer to it, please feel free.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. So two last things. The link I'm posting here, which is also in the resource guide, is the School for Global Citizenry. So this was kind of like an introduction to trauma in the moment, but I'm going to be doing a 4-week course. That will be an online course that will start April 1st and run for 4 weeks. That's going to be trauma and grounding amid collective crisis. So it's going to we're going to have 4 weeks of content, 10 hours total, that will go deeper both into practices, so grounding practices and tools, as well as like sort of fleshing out some more of the kind of information piece around trauma and the moment, and some learnings we have from the past and things that we can understand about the present. And so that, if you want to learn more about that, the link here is for the School of Global Citizenry, but it's also in that resource document. The very last thing I want to share is that beginning this week, TRAC is going to be doing a sort of peer network of check-in support for folks. What this is meant to be is kind of in place of the hotline type things that are either not as accessible or that people aren't necessarily going to reach out to, a bridge between somebody seeking therapy or needing more intensive care, and folks that are just home and alone and would like somebody to check in with them. And then from that point, we can refer folks out to higher levels of support if they need it, more additional support like virtual therapy, other kind of programs. But it's meant to be a bridging the gap kind of place for folks who may have greater need in this moment to just be supported. So what that network will be is a continuum of volunteers, folks that have background in everything from peer support to healing and mental health. You don't need a technical degree because it's very much going to be in that peer-to-peer idea. And folks will get a 30-minute check-in from someone once they request care. So there's 2 Google forms. There's one if you would like to volunteer, and there's one if you would like support. And what we'll be doing, and Lydia is going to be, this is part of what Lydia is going to be helping with, is matching people up to access that support. And then for those people that are volunteering into the network, we'll have a check-in call once a week to kind of see where people are at, what's going on. We're not going to like leave people blind, that kind of thing, to do this. We're going to be very connected to folks that are providing this care to, like we talked about before, provide support to folks that are providing support. And again, for both people that need this and for those that might volunteer, it's a very baseline, bridging the gap kind of thing, right? So we're not providing therapy. We are providing 1 to 3 check-ins with folks. And then for some people, that may be all they need, right? And maybe they can't afford mental health. Maybe they don't need other kinds of care. Maybe they just wanted somebody to say, are you doing all right? And talk about the things that they're dealing with in their head, possibly alone. And then if people need additional support, this is also why we're building as robustly that resource guide. Then we can say, here's 3 places you can ask someone, that you can go to for virtual therapy. Here's somebody who's doing somatic experiencing, right, virtually. Here's this yoga class. So we can also refer people to stuff that they might need. So I'm going to post those 2 links here. And again, they are also in the resource guide as well. And I offer the invitation as you have your own either needs or bandwidth for either. Again, it's open for anyone. So if you're somebody who wants just to have somebody to check in and chat with for yourself, feel free. If you're somebody who feels like you want to volunteer, a couple of hours to support somebody else here and there, feel free. And also feel free to share any of this with other folks that that might either need support or might want to volunteer to offer support. All of this, again, will go up on my Facebook and on all of the TRAC social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook tomorrow. So you'll have that, as well as the recording for this session. So for yourself, or if somebody missed this and wanted to participate but couldn't, that will also be up online tomorrow. So any final questions on all that? I know that was a lot of information. Pretty much all of the basics of what I just said is in that TRAC resource guide. So if you clicked on that, or if you check social media for it tomorrow, you'll find anything that you might need. Any final question on any of that, like last bit of stuff that I shared? No? Okay, so hopefully that means I didn't confuse people too much. So thank you so much for joining, for participating. I almost got it exactly on time at 7:30. I'm not all that timely, so I feel good about that. Thank you everyone for coming, for sharing, whether you shared in words or you shared just in your presence in the space. I really appreciated having this time with all of you. And stay well, stay safe, stay healthy, create your own protected space in whatever ways work for you. Have a good night.